watching The Producer's Room, a streaming web series featuring the creators behind the hit songs of today's music industry. Songwriters, music producers, and artists discuss their creative process as well as examining current issues and technologies in today's rapidly changing music business. Your host is producer, songwriter, and educator Dave Tuff. Welcome to The Producer's Room. Welcome to this episode of The Producer's Room with Dave Tuff. Once again, we're coming to you from historic Music Row here in Nashville, Tennessee, and the House of David Studios, owned by David Briggs. And if you haven't checked out the history of this place online, I'd love for you to go Google it and check it out. And today's guest, I'm really excited to have. I'm happy to call him a friend, Bob Bullock. Let me tell you a little bit about Bob's background before we get started here. Bob was born in California and started music business while still in high school. He moved to the Los Angeles area and started training under some great names here. We'll have to talk more about these guys. Great engineers like Roy Haley, Roger Nichols, Barney Perkins. And of course, then he came up as an engineer himself, working with artists in Los Angeles such as The Tubes, Art Garfunkel, Seals and Crofts, Crazy Horse, my favorite, we were talking about Chic, Corea, being a jazz head, RDO Speedwagon. In 1981, it looks like you were working on a record for Kenny Rogers, is that correct?
That's
and
correct.
Met Jimmy Bowen. And Jimmy convinced you to come to Nashville, or?
Well, that wasn't quite the whole story, but
The longest short of it.
Yeah,
Okay, we'll go into that. Yeah. And then finally, let me just get into Bob's engineering credits. Bob has worked in Nashville with over 50 gold and platinum, or been on 50 gold or platinum albums, including Shania Twain, Reba McEntire, George Strait, Tanya Tucker, Loveless, George Jones, John Anderson. The list keeps going on. Hank Williams Jr., Jimmy Buffett, Steve Wariner, and we'll talk more about some of the artists you're working with today, which I'm reading that you're working worldwide nowadays right out of your studio in Franklin. But without further ado, let's welcome Bob Bullock. Right. Thanks for being here, Bob.
Nice to
and
see
you said that you had worked here in the House of David before?
Yes.
Studios, yeah?
Yeah, in fact, I think the first project I did here was Mandrell Sisters.
Oh, wow.
That was probably, I started working in Nashville 1981 was the first trip I made here. So 82, 83, I just went back and forth. So somewhere in there, and probably, or about the time I moved here in 84,
yeah.
I was working with the Mandrell Sisters, did some stuff for their, I guess it would have been still some TV things they were doing, and then Louise Mandrell.
Wow.
And so we did a lot of that here. There were some other things I did here, and I'm honestly kind of even forgetting what they
That's
were.
cool, man. So what attracted you to Nashville? I mean, I just mentioned Jimmy Bowen, but how did that whole transition happen, and what attracted you to make the move? Because it sounds like you're working on some huge sessions out there in LA to make the move from Los Angeles to Nashville back.
Well, it was really pretty simple.
Yeah.
The way it came about, I was trying to move up to Northern California, and I was working up in Northern California, the San Rafael area. With the Doobie Brothers.
Cool.
And it was working at Fantasy Studios.
Man.
And I was trying to work out a way to be able to just move there permanently. Yeah. Well, during that time, and that would have been probably around 79 or something, Kenny Rogers purchased...
That was his heyday, right? Kenny Rogers.
Oh, yeah.
Late 70s.
Yeah, he had a big new, another comeback with the song Lady with Lionel Richie. And he recorded that at a studio, the song Lady, he recorded a studio that had originally been ABC Dunhill, which is kind of where I started out.
Right. And
radio recorders, then ABC Dunhill, and then I started working around other studios, Kendon Recorders and all. But ABC Dunhill had sold the business to MCA Records. MCA closed it basically as a studio for themselves. They bought the acts and the catalog, all that stuff. But it became a private studio called Concord.
Okay.
And I worked there a few times. In fact, I think I worked there with Michael McDonald on something. I forgot what something he was doing, I guess.
This was pre-Doobies for him, or this was Doobies?
It was
time for him?
It was kind of getting to be post-Doobies at that point. Yeah, he was still. I think he was still in the Doobies at that time, but he was starting to do more of his own. And so Kenny had recorded with Reggie Dozier, an engineer I'd worked under, quite a lot at ABC at Dunhill. And he decided that since that was such a big hit and everything, it was magic. He wanted to own a studio, and he ended up buying Concord and calling it Lion's Share.
Okay.
And he put a lot of money in it. We had carte blanche to just do whatever. The ABC Dunhill was pretty state of the art.
Yeah.
And then Concord, it kind of was sort of a just the same. And he came in, I guess whatever it was, I think 1980, and poured a lot of money in it, and we modernized it. New consoles.
So was that okay? Late 70s. Could you sync like 3 or 4 24 tracks? I mean, how many inputs was the console?
When we built the new studio, that had we took one of the old API rooms. There were 3 rooms there, and we took one of the API rooms. It was the larger space, and put a Neve 8108 disc, and that was 56 channels.
Wow.
And we did at that time, we went up from it having all 3M machines to 3M 79 machines to Studer 800s.
Oh, yeah.
And we did have the Studer lockup, but it wasn't all that grand, really.
Yeah.
I mean, it worked, and it kind of worked. So there's a lot of stories with that too.
Yeah.
But while I was, working with Kenny, and I was still thinking, well, this is great, and I meeting a lot of great people. Terry Williams from the first edition was managing the studio, and it was really a family. It was really great.
Sure.
I still was thinking, I kind of want to move up to Northern California.
Yeah.
I was working with Kenny on a record called Love Will Turn You Around with David Malloy and Even Stevens. And they were from here. They're from Nashville. So one night, just out of the blue, David said, Bob, you're not really, I know you're from here, but you're not really as showbiz as a lot of people in Hollywood, He said, have you ever gone to Nashville or tried or looked at Nashville? I said, no, And he said, well, you should just come out sometime, and if you'll come out to Nashville, I'll show you around. So I think like the next year, and it was about probably April or May, so it was really beautiful here in Nashville. I thought, well, I can take some time off, and maybe I'll just fly to Nashville and see if David will show me around, just see what Nashville's like. So during that stay of just being here a couple of days, he took me around. He introduced me to Jim Ed Norman, introduced me to Jimmy Bowen, was working at Soundstage, I think on a Dean Martin record.
Wow.
And I thought, yeah, this is kind of cool. The studios weren't up to the modern, thing that we had in LA and New York and everything, but it was a very cool vibe.
But you got out at the right time, because I think that in LA, that was kind of the last of the heyday where folks were playing together and all of that. I mean,
it was at the time. It actually changed rapidly after I moved to Nashville. I mean, I didn't.
It's like what MIDI came in '83, so that's right there.
So what happened for me, and so as it turns out, I went back to L.A. not thinking too much about that, other than that was really an interesting trip. And David was great to show me around, introduce me to the folks, and back business as usual in L.A.
Sure.
And then I got a call from, I think it was the Mandrell sisters producer, Eddie Kilroy, I think, that Jimmy Bowen had suggested that he have me mix an album for them. And they had just built Emerald Studios.
Right.
David Malloy and Even Stevens had just completed Emerald Studios. I think we might have been the first clients in there, in fact. But he called me, asked me to come in and work on this project. And I think it was to do some overdubs to start with, if I remember right. And then we went to Soundstage.
Right.
The backstage there had the small little Neve 8068,
which is Chuck's room now. Is he's in? I can't. It
is, but it's not the same room.
Okay, it's changed.
They've blown it out.
Yeah, I got you.
It's beautiful, but it had an 8068 desk, and which is now at Quad Studios, and so we mixed, and I went back, and then I think Jimmy Bowen called me to do, I think it was a Hank Jr. record to mix. Yeah. And so I just kept getting these calls.
So were you a mixer before in LA? Or it sounds like you've done more tracking, right?
Well,
or some,
those were in that period of time, it was more likely that if you were recording a record, you were going to mix the record.
That line wasn't there.
Yeah, it wasn't,
because the Clear Mountains came in like the early '80s,
mid
'80s,
and they didn't really want to fuss with tracking as much, and so mixing became like a specialty.
Yeah, I got you.
And that's where you kind of got the term mixing in.
Right, right.
And
so you did it both. You tracked it and
and I never really had like in fact, I had no intention of really being kind of only a mixing engineer in my own studio, but I have a mix room, and so that's primarily what
you're doing. Well, you've done for a long time, but especially nowadays.
Yeah, and so that's how. So what happens? I made so many trips that I kept having to get permission from Terry Williams. Can I leave for 2 weeks? And
realized the pattern there.
And after a while, it came to, and we're still very close friends. It came to, hey Bob, are you gonna stay in L.A. or stay in Nashville?
Yeah.
So I moved to Nashville in '84.
Yeah.
And was never under contract with anyone, but I could say that for probably a good solid 10 years, Jimmy Bowen kept me. I'm sure I did well over 100 albums with him.
Well, that's cool to hit the ground and be already plugged in with a mentor and someone that's your advocate.
Yeah. So that I have no regrets on that at all. In fact, and as you just pointed out, what happened with that is my peers in LA were starting to say, "Gee, we're not really cutting bands now and everything. It's a lot of MIDI stuff and program stuff." And I didn't realize how much I loved that until I made the segue from LA to doing the same thing in Nashville. And that also was a very exciting time because Nashville, the Nashville community and country music and all, they really wanted to kick up the the market share, kick up the numbers, the sales and everything. And so Jimmy Bowen, in fact, had a lot to do with, he didn't own the studios, but he could guarantee a lot of work to these studios. Yeah. And so all of a sudden Hidley rooms were coming in and SSL desk and not only Studer 800s that had already made it to Nashville, but then even some of the early digital dash machines. Like
is there a record that sticks in your mind that's kind of, or maybe a period of records where the sound really you could notice that change in the technology of investing in some of the higher quality
from Nashville?
Yeah. Well, if you can't pinpoint something,
I can't really
fine,
pinpoint something, but that era,
you would hear a change though from what.
And it was all that was being used. All the new digital technology was being used by myself and others that were, had an analog background. So I'd say we were pretty discriminating about the sound differences of digital, and it took a while for me to really embrace digital too. But the thing that was exciting about it is Nashville had an opportunity to play leapfrog.
Right.
All of a sudden there's a lot of new money going into studios, and so they got the latest technology. And so really Nashville was, in my opinion, pretty cutting edge.
Yeah.
And Jimmy Bowen was responsible for probably at least 4 of the rooms.
Wow.
That ended up, because he had such a machine going. We had studios going 24 hours a day.
Well, this is great stuff. We're going to come back with Bob and talk more technology, and I want to hear what you're doing nowadays too.
Okay, sure.
So let's do that. See you guys in just a second.
I have a gift of playing music. That's what I got. I was pretty much afraid of everything. Afraid of the world, afraid of speaking. Music was the voice I didn't have.
Welcome back to the Producer's Room here at House of David Studios. And once again, our guest today is Bob Bullock, engineer extraordinaire here in Nashville. And we were just talking about, first of all, how you got to Nashville and then some of the changes that you saw happening in Nashville. I want to jump, actually, with a question moving to current times. How has this, everything you've seen through your career, affected how you're adapting now to the future, and how are you adapting? Have you changed your setup? And I know this is kind of a loaded question, but what is your workflow nowadays? What artists are you working with nowadays? Just all of that. So let's talk about some of that.
Okay. we're walking through 40 years here.
I know,
so,
man.
yeah,
And we can go back. We can go back. 'Cause I want some good mutt stories too, man. So
Okay.
we'll go back. But
one thing that I feel fortunate about, and since I do some teaching as well,
Yeah.
I try to encourage this. Luckily for me, I've always loved being in a recording studio.
Yeah.
It makes me happy to be sitting in this studio. So
Yeah.
that's been one thing.
did we tell you that we had a trapdoor in this studio too? Did you know that?
to drop somebody out?
No, to when Elvis parked in the garage, and then David can tell you more about this, and then to get up into the studio.
Oh yeah, I did know that. In
yeah.
fact, David came up through the trapdoor late one night when I was
scared
working with him. Yeah, while the lights were out, and Kathy Burdick, I think, was singing.
Okay.
It might have been on. It might have been on a like Louise Mandrell thing, but David just it's like really late at night, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, and he just pops up the trap door and comes barging up, and I scared, and I hear this scream in the microphone, so it was pretty funny. So yeah, I was aware of the trap door.
So speaking of trapdoors, do you have a trapdoor in your home studio nowadays? You said that you were doing some instruction out of there.
Yeah.
Of course, we know each other because you taught so many years at Belmont University. You taught our mixing class and shared your expertise with the students. But as far as your home setup nowadays, are you in a, it's so vague to call it a home studio because I'm sure you have a lot of professional equipment in there. But are you working primarily out of your house nowadays?
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
And that was something I kind of, I guess, got off track. But I realized even as a young person in the industry that I enjoyed the gear and the technology. Yeah. And so through my early days, things didn't change as quickly, but they did change.
Yeah.
We're in an industry that really kind of didn't start centuries ago. It started decades ago. So even in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and all that, 70s is when I was really starting to get active in the industry, and it was still pretty new. So things did start to move. Now it moves at a faster pace. But I did, realize that if I wasn't interested in change, then that would
be the wrong industry.
Yeah, wrong place to be.
So that's a good lesson for our viewers.
Oh yes,
change.
yeah. So luckily, I enjoy that. So yeah, where I'm at now is totally different than the way I worked 30 years ago.
And you're continuing to have to learn, right? I mean,
every
like
day.
You said,
But I enjoy that, luckily.
Right.
And so I guess where do you? I'm mixing.
There's so many places to start, but you're primarily doing mixing, like you said, out of your room, and you had also said that you were doing some surround mixing a couple years back, but those projects we'll talk more about that where the consumer industry is going. But basically, you got your home set up. Why not go out and start a commercial studio kind of thing? I mean, is it a different environment? I'm trying to get to the place where maybe some of our viewers aren't in Nashville. They don't know really what the scene is. But we have seen the decline of the commercial studio, I guess. I mean, more and more studios here going out of business, yet more than ever, there's home studios and what I call democratization of the recording industry where it's like not unusual for every third person on a block to have a recording studio. So have you found that whole environment hurts your business, helps your business, makes you stand out more as a professional, all of the above?
There's so many there's so many components that go into how we got where we are.
Well,
here,
let's talk about it.
And
talk about it.
The whole industry has changed. People still love music. People still make music. There's upsides and downsides to the change, but you can't go backwards. So it doesn't really matter if you want to think what's the downsides are. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Budgets have changed dramatically, and the music industry has gone much more independent, which is means a lot of people are trying to find ways to get their music out there and recorded, and they don't have, a major record company.
Yeah.
They aren't signed to that, and because it's more independent and there's smaller budgets, the style, and I do miss this, but the style that I was accustomed to and working, certainly all through the 70s, 80s, and probably well into the 90s even was, we moved into studios, and we
And so,
stayed
so
there, you know.
back then, how much Liberty? How long did it take to complete a
Well,
record,
that's you varied.
budget-wise?
Well, I mean, I'd say that in LA, I mean,
Yeah.
I was part of some budgets, you know, records. The budgets were well over $300,000, you know, to make, you know, the
And
production
back in that
cost.
day, if you know, for inflation,
Oh yeah, I could buy it.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I'll give you an example. We could talk. There's time, but you know, had a little bit of involvement with Ken Clay and Richard Dashett with the Fleetwood Mac's Rumors album, and in his book, that record took 1 year to the day, I think, to complete, and the final tab was about $1 million. You know, and you know you could buy a brand new nice car for $2,000 or $3,000. You know, so that gives you an idea.
Sure.
But even when I came to Nashville, I'd say the budgets here in the '80s, which were coming up, the record companies were definitely bringing them up to help promote, you know, the notion of studios equipping. This gear was very expensive. A recording studio was, you know, a couple $1 million to build. I mean, you know, consoles that were $600,000, tape machines. When we got in digital, they were $180,000 a piece. So, with, you know, all this stuff breaking down and fragmenting more, it's been impossible for most people to come in and move into a studio that, you know, was renting for like $1,500 a day and write and perform. There was definitely, I'm, you know, here to say there was a lot of magic that happened in all that, because it became such a took on such a life of its own to create music.
Yeah.
The people were going in and out. You were set up. There was, you know, plenty of money to work with, and I think a lot of great music came out of the 70s and 80s and all that because of that. Yeah. So now we're at a point where, you know, most people that are very, you know, they're still creative, they're still, you know, passionate, they want to get their music out there. They don't have that kind of budget. And so what's made that fit is the equipment's a lot cheaper and getting better, you know, all the time. And it's much more possible to record maybe some tracks in a tracking studio like this, get your basics. A lot of people now kind of more like the way, you know, film works. You know, they're saying that, you know, they'll need another instrument and have a guitar player do some overdubs for them from their studio. Bass player, I need to, you know, put real drums on this track. You know? So that's kind of where we are today. And I realized that for me, I needed to have my own environment, you know, for the same reason. And it quite honestly, it came from some people that wanted me to, say, mix an album for them, but they couldn't justify paying me and a studio.
Right, the overhead for the studio.
And even though the large console and all the gear and everything for mixing is great, there are some things that you just simply can't do. If you want to do a remix, it's going to be very expensive.
Yeah, this thing doesn't move by itself.
Yeah, now for tracking and everything, that's one thing I've discovered.
Right.
That my process for tracking bands and music has not really changed.
Yeah.
Other than maybe we'll track to Pro Tools.
Well,
you know,
has it been worse though? Has the art of engineering been lost a little bit, and it's more of a fix it in the mix kind of thing now because everybody's not in a quote unquote commercial studio and not learning the craft? Or do you think it's not that bad? It's not that dire that you're still getting good tones that you're having to mix?
It varies.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it varies a good bit. I do encourage, you know, young people getting, you know, the education, the background, you know, the programs like Belmont, you know, I mean, the you know, working under someone, an apprentice. That's what I grew up with. You know, I was fortunate to say in all.
Yeah, I was looking at all these names.
Yeah, you know, it was a master apprentice thing. Yeah. So, you know, if you go back, you know, even before me, but certainly what I even saw in the early 70s is no one really was recording music unless they were a professional.
Right.
Okay. I mean, the artists were out there working hard, and somebody had to scout them and see them and say, you know, we've got a, you know, artist here.
Right.
And whatever development they need or whatever, we're willing to do it because, you know, James Taylor, Led Zeppelin, the Beatles, what, you know, it was, you know, the record companies found acts and they had the money to develop them and break them in the industry.
And they had more than one chance. They had they could put out an album, not do so well, maybe get a chance
because
to do
because the record companies worked off of numbers, you know. So if they had one act that broke big, that would bring in enough money to support artist development for several others for the future. Yeah. And so what happened is anyone that had a recording, I mean, it was really record companies when I first started that had studios. It wasn't, you know, it was just when I went into Hollywood, it was just starting to change for, you know, some independent studios, but they weren't home studios.
Like the Alan Sides of the world? Or,
Well,
Bill Putnam had done it way earlier, but he's one of the first pioneers.
Yeah,
but then the second wave of guys opening some independent stuff.
Yeah, but, you know, for a long time, it was, you know, Atlantic, working at Atlantic Studios,
or Capitol,
CBS, Capitol, you know, they had their own rooms. And so the people that worked in them, the engineers, it was like the master and apprentice. Mm-hmm. So someone that was a master engineer would mentor a young apprentice, and then that would move up.
So I'm going to put you on the spot here. If I name each of these mentors of yours, maybe 4 or 5 mentors, could you tell me one or two things that you learned from them or that taught you?
Yeah.
Okay, so first guy on the list, Umberto, and you have to help me with that, Gatica?
Umberto Gatica.
Yeah.
Right.
So 1 or 2 things you learned from Umberto.
Well, Umberto's a perfectionist.
Okay.
That's one of the wide variety of things. You know, I got to be part of, I'll get off track just for a moment.
No, that's cool,
I got to be part of assisting Roger Nichols of Steely Dan.
Ooh.
Later, I got to engineer with Mutt Lange, and so working with Steely Dan definitely.
Ladies and gentlemen, he's worked with the best.
Well, what it did is it groomed me to be able to really, you know, get that kind of, you know, slow pace of you know, of intensity and everything of production, you know, and appreciate it too.
Right.
And so when I worked with Umberto kind of fit in that category too. I started off assisting him, and he was very meticulous, very detailed. But he was an engineer that I saw doing things in a grander way, you might say. Mm-hmm. It was a lot of outboard gear, a lot of you know, intense trying to clean up tracks and everything, and a lot of attention to detail. And then his work speaks for itself. It's fantastic. So I'd say what I really learned with him was probably how to kind of manage or even recognize the value of, like, you know, we've got a lot of outboard gear in here, and we've got this great sounding desk, and we're going to spend a couple days mixing this song or a long time tracking things, you know.
Yeah, so, that's good. Okay. I'm going to keep naming them. So if you don't mind, Reggie Dozier.
Okay, Reggie Dozier, who when I was working at ABC Dunhill, there were 2 guys. He should be on that list too. Barney Perkins.
Yeah, he is.
Barney Perkins. I'll put those 2 together. Okay. Barney Perkins and Reggie Dozier pretty much were like the R&B music kings. Okay, so
no relation to Holland.
Reggie is Lamont Dozier's brother.
Okay, got it.
So not only did we have, like, you know, Holland Dozier Holland at ABC Dunhill all the time, and Lamont, you know, did a record or 2 with Lamont also, because I started doing some engineering while I was there, but I was working under. In one environment at ABC Dunhill, Roger Nichols, Reggie Dozier, Barney Perkins, Roy Halley, Howard Gale, and they all kind of had their own clients. But Barney and Reggie both had they were the go-to R&B engineers. Okay, so that brought in everything from Barry White's orchestra to Aretha Franklin, the Temptations, the Miracles. It was real exciting to me, and so what I really got from both of those guys was, you know, they knew the music. I mean, they knew the style. They knew how to work with the clients. You know, they brought the vibe, and everybody that's on that list were excellent at their craft. Different styles, but excellent. You know? And so Reggie and Barney both, they were pretty interchangeable, but the clients really respected them. I mean, they trusted them. You know. So
let's do two more and we'll take
Okay.
a quick break. So when I say hear the name or see the name Roy Haley, is that the Simon and Garfunkel Roy Haley?
yeah, Roy Halley. Actually.
Halley.
Yeah,
Okay, help me out. Yeah.
Okay, what I learned from Roy, another one that was very meticulous thing, was echo.
Oh, that's cool, man.
He was the echo king. Okay.
Did he do the because we always talk about the boxer, the night and night.
Bridge over troubled water?
Bridge over troubled.
The snare drum. They actually ran
that's true.
the lines down to a live echo chamber, and the drummer, overdubbed a
That's
2
right.
and 4 in an echo chamber. Yeah, Roy.
He was a New York guy, right? Or
Yeah,
not-
yeah.
But you worked out
in LA
with him.
Yeah,
Okay.
he was a New York guy. But Roy was fantastic. He also was very meticulous.
Yeah.
The alignments of the tape machines. Generally, the tech staffs would do alignments, but as an assistant, I'd be responsible to check them, or if I didn't align them, but at least check them. And Roy would come in, and even after everything was set up, he'd put a test tape up to make sure
Everyone did their job.
Yeah,
right?
and if a needle was off, that much, he'd be in my face.
Oh, man.
But the thing is he, all these people were passionate.
Yeah.
That was the thing I got the comment. Everybody was so passionate about what they did, and everybody was trying to make the best record they can make. But Roy, his setup would include, and we're going, we're in the 70s, okay? His setup would include several tape machines like you have in here, like half tracks, everything set up to be tape delays. Keep in mind we didn't have any digital stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it was phase shifting and pre-delay for echo and everything was all done with tape machines. So we'd have to set up 3 or 4 half track, two track machines to set
then
up
move the
delays.
heads for the certain
Or
how,
VSO, all that to change the delay speeds. And then like ABC Dunhill had 3 live echo chambers, big rooms for echo chambers, and 8 EMT plates, and also I think 4 Cooper time cubes.
Yeah.
So we had a lot for
Now
reverb.
you can buy the UA plugin, right?
Oh yeah, and I do. I have it, and it's great. But I kind of missed the garden hose, in the box.
Right.
But so Roy, I learned. I mean, it was just amazing the way he could make reverb add dimension to something, So
Wow.
so those were all great, and I don't know who else.
Oh, I got one more on your bio, and then I got one more I want to ask you about. We're going to take a quick break,
Okay.
and we'll come back with those two.
Okay.
All right, guys. Like I said, we're going to take a quick break. We'll see you in just a second.
The town has this energy. You never know who you're going to bump into.
We moved to Nashville, and I started singing in clubs 5 nights a week.
On any given night, you can go to the End and watch a show. You go to Tootsie's and watch a show. You go to Exit Inn. You go to the Ryman.
They're sick musicians and sick singers. It doesn't surprise me. It's Music City.
All right. Welcome back to the Producer's Room. Once again, our guest is Bob Bullock today, and we were just talking about some mentors, and I think it's so important for you to point that out, that it's good for anyone to have a mentor to really give you some guidance and stuff in your career. And so there's about 2 or 3 I still wanted to get to. So Roger Nichols, and when I see Roger's name, I think Steely Dan. Of course, he worked with other artists, but what are some of the things you learned working under Roger?
Roger was on staff at ABC Dunhill when I got there. When I started there, they were finishing up. They were mixing actually the Katy Light album for Steely Dan.
Cool.
My understanding is that Roger was assigned to Donald and Walter, or basically Steely Dan, from ABC Dunhill as a staff engineer, and they were all kindred spirits. That is especially Donald Fagen and Walter Becker. And Roger Nichols, they called him the Immortal. They were all audiophiles. Okay, so I heard the word state of the art and hi-fi and everything like 100 times a day.
Yeah.
But so they went through great lengths to not only have their music be every note, everything to be exactly what they wanted in the arrangements, and the arrangements were wonderful, but they wanted the sounds to be treated just as importantly. And so Roger was the technical guy.
Yeah.
And he was always, he was an inventor also. So
Yeah. Was that was pre-Window, but he used it.
Yeah, he used Wendell. Wendell, the automated percussionist, was on the Gaucho album, which I worked on a little bit.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Wendell that year been about, I don't know, maybe around 79 or something. But yeah,
The first Drumagog or Slate Trigger, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah,
pre all of that. Right?
Yeah, but he had, but Roger invented, this percussionist, computer that it filled a whole van. So we had to unload a whole van to bring it in the studio, and he named him Wendell.
Yeah.
And Wendell actually got nominated for a Grammy Award as a hand percussionist. Yes, yeah.
Interesting.
And so, they were doing things with it, like, cabasa overdubs and tambourines and stuff. but Roger went on to even do more, inventions and had, R in digital and all that too.
Right. I remember some good plugins. Yeah.
But he was the key component, of the technical side with Steely Dan. And then later I worked with him also with John Denver. Okay. So he and John Denver, are also peas in a pod. And so that that's how that was. I mean, for me, what was great about working with all of them were everybody was different. I learned different things, but mostly what I learned from them was just how they worked with the artist and other producers and musicians.
Sure.
And it's so important when you're engineering to keep a vibe. Mm-hmm. There's things that are different about when I produce. It's some different things, but it's all related to you got to maintain a good vibe with everybody.
So are you maybe your top 5 rules for assistants, like that you could give just words of advice, I guess? I mean, because I've heard that you're talking about establishing a vibe. This is why I'm asking you. But yet I've heard that don't speak unless spoken to by the artist, kind of stuff. I mean, any words of wisdom you have for creating that vibe in the studio, or would you agree with that piece of advice as far as assistants go, or maybe seconds on a session?
Well, you have to know your place in everything.
Right.
So I don't know how much
that might be. It's just kind of extracted, but just to create a good vibe in the studio. Obviously, we talked about just being able to get along with everybody. That's a starting place.
That's the one thing that is probably still the same at times. Is I worked with people where we'd put in 90, 100-hour weeks of being together. It was like a commune, you might say. And it didn't work unless there was people that actually dug being with each other,
Right.
And, for assistant engineers, obviously, even when I was an assistant, the reason you're an assistant is you're hoping to be sitting in the first engineer's seat someday. Now, I don't, I never tried to steal anybody's work, but I tried to make them look good. I was told at a very young age that the assistant makes the engineer look good, the engineer makes the producer look good, and the producer makes the artist look good.
That's,
and
there it is, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah,
that's a nice.
And so you just kind of go into that. So you shouldn't even be involved in this industry unless you just have undying passion for doing it.
Yeah.
Because it's a process. I mean, as I said, there's records that I've done that, it was, they could have all been movies. It was several months of ups and downs and stress and everything. Exactly. But if you love doing it, then it's fun. So I guess other things is for an assistant, I always tried to make sure that everything I did was very thorough. If someone wanted me to do a rough mix, I tried to make the best rough mix I could make in that amount of time. Like you're always trying to impress people.
Sure. One more name I wanted to, and speaking of making albums for 3 to 6 months or 9 months, is Mutt Lange and your work with Shania and all of that. Now, you worked on the second record? I can't remember. Come on.
He did 3 records with her, and I worked on the second and third one. The first one, The Woman in Me,
yes,
I believe they did primarily in Quebec, in Canada. And then the second album, they tracked with Jeff Balding, I believe, at Master Phonics. And after the tracking, Mutt I had worked with Mutt before on a record. In fact, I had worked with Mutt on a record at was working at Battery Studios when he met Shania.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, Dan Huff and I were both working with Mutt, and so he started dating Shania, and I was working with him. But when he started working with Shania and they got the budget to do that Woman in Me album, they did it in I think they did most or all of it in Canada.
Okay.
So I was really, flattered and happy when they did the Come On Over record,
Right.
and he got me involved in it.
Yeah.
And
how many? Just millions upon millions. I think that. I mean, both of those last two.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I know that both Come On Over and Up were excess of $1 million production costs.
Oh, I mean millions of sales.
Oh, million.
You guys are up there in the 40s or 50s.
Oh yeah. In fact,
millions of sales.
In
aren't
fact,
you, on those two.
the Come On Over record, which is was just amazing to me too.
Yeah.
It's still the largest selling
Country.
it's the largest selling record by a female artist.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty sure in all genres.
Wow.
And that. I mean, Mutt's brilliant.
Yeah.
And that was just, he brought his background and expertise from everything from, Def Leppard to
Right.
Bryan Adams and
Yeah.
before that the Cars and all that.
That's
and
true. Yeah.
And he loves country music. I mean, I found that was really true. He loves country music, and so he was real serious about country music, but he had such a different background that the style and the combination of all those things coming to Shania kind of changed the whole country format.
It did, yeah. And you were there, man. That's pretty cool. I want to. Well, gosh, can you tell us a little bit more about some of those sessions, or what your role? I mean, were you primarily a tracking function or mixing?
Yeah,
function?
actually, I didn't mix those records.
Yeah.
I did overdubs actually.
Yeah,
on those
that's
records.
cool, man.
Those records, the technology was changing because for Mutt, spending a few years doing a record, technology is changing while you're doing it.
Yeah.
So, for example, the Come On Over record, we were still using the Sony 48 track digital, and working.
Because DAWs weren't quite fast enough. Is this where we were? I mean, technology-wise,
during that album, maybe. Well, yeah, probably there wasn't enough hard drive space and everything. I don't even know
Well,
where
I'm
that
trying to
overlap.
remember
But
what
by the time
year
we
that
did the
was,
Up
but-
album,
yeah.
that was Pro Tools. But Mutt had a Pro Tools system that I think was 7 interfaces,
Right.
and even at that, we were using, I think, 8 gigabyte hard drives. So the way we were working, which was at 48K, but the track count and everything, we were maxing out track counts.
Yeah.
We were swapping. I mean, we had to keep logs of the
And
hard
maybe
drives.
bouncing and.
Oh yeah, it was a lot. It was actually more work for the assistants that
Right.
were really doing most of that, but it was a lot of work. And then Mutt, works very, very slowly and far
Right.
as like meticulous. For me, and maybe maybe it's my own perfectionism, but for me, having started, working like with Roger Nichols, and
It was
as I
just
said, it was kind of like I
something-
got that.
Yeah.
I got that. Yes, this is going to be really long days and weeks, but the finished product's going to be very good.
Exactly.
And so that made it worth it to me. And then working with Mutt, it was the same thing. We're going to be working on this, organ track all day, but it'll be really great when it's
Yeah.
done,
Yeah, man.
And so my role with him, there was always several engineers involved, with Mutt, and he had his own studios as well. And he traveled around the world to do, strings in Milan, Italy,
Right.
and all that. I did a little traveling with him, but certainly not all of it. But Mutt's a very capable musician, engineer, and singer.
Yeah.
But as a producer and the songwriter, he's everything I worked on, he was co-writer with the artist. So he was very focused on the writing, producing it as a songwriter, and he would cast people and hire people that
And did you guys have to try a few? Was it like a Steely Dan scenario where you had to try a few folks out, or did he know exactly who he wanted to cast?
He probably was a little faster at casting who he wanted and stuff.
Yeah.
Steely Dan in those days, they were doing a lot more experimentation.
Seems like
everybody was great,
Yeah.
but they would be looking for that one magic
thing,
little
yeah.
thing. And Mutt, was coming into this, especially by the time we did Shania's Up record when it was on Pro Tools, and we could do direct recording over and stuff like things like where we could do playlist and all that stuff.
The one thing I remember about that record too is that it was like a dual record, and one was pop and one was country, like two different mixes. That was interesting.
Yeah, it was. In fact, what happened, at least where I saw it, that's what made it all really so so incredible.
Yeah.
Is when we were doing the Up album, Mike Shipley mixed for most things for Mutt.
So he mixed the pop and the country version.
Yeah, well, and that's what I was getting at. Yeah. So Mike Shipley came. In fact, when we finished the last overdubs for Come On Over, and did rough mixes for the very first time for the label. Which shows what a different era it was. They hadn't even heard anything. They were chomping at the bit to hear something. But when we finished the last overdubs and the last rough mixes, I left. I was in New York, and Mike Shipley came in to start mixing literally the next day. And I think it took them 2 months to the day to mix those 16 songs.
Yeah.
And that was the main album for Come On Over. After that, they started doing a lot of remixes for different versions for different markets and everything.
Yeah.
And at that time, I think, is when they even came out with The Woman in Me and Come On Over. I think they had 9 singles off the Come On Over record out of 16. And they started doing variations. Some different album covers were showing up and everything. So when Mutt and Shania started writing what was going to become the Up album, they decided to really create 3 CDs with the same songs.
Wow.
So it was, unless I have them reversed, it was either 19 songs or 16. I've forgotten now.
Yeah.
But the record that I worked on was what I think they called the green CD, and that was the more earthy CD.
Sure.
So he had one version of all these same songs, same vocals, same basic drums. One was more pop, so
a little more programmed versus organic.
Yeah, and it had live orchestra strings and everything. Wow. And then our second variation of all that was a lot of the same parts, same melody, same parts were done more organically. So where maybe he went to Milan and had a string section on what was the Red album.
Yeah.
We also then we would do like just maybe more of a country violin fiddle type thing, and the same thing with guitars, keyboards, steel guitar replaced what was some of the keyboard pad things and stuff. And so when we were in Compass Point Studios in the Bahamas, and when we pulled up all the tracks, there were like all the tracks that had to do for the Red album, 128 channels, and then ones that, a lot that we'd mute because now we're going to do the same thing with different instruments.
Yeah.
And then simultaneously while we were doing that, and I do forget the names, but Mutt had 2 producers that were British actually, but I think they were in India, and they were doing a world version of the album. So it actually came out as 3 different projects, It was kind of like working on Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, man, that's
all
cool.
3 were being done at the same
pretty
time.
Cool. All right, we're going to come back and talk more technical stuff with Bob because as an engineer, you can talk probably all day about some good old microphones and preamps and DIs and all that. So we'll see you guys here in just a second on the Producer's Room.
What would a degree from Belmont University mean to you?
I'm so proud of you, darling.
Maybe it's time you found out.
Thanks, Dad. I can't believe I finally did it.
Belmont University Adult Degree Program. Finish what you started.
All right, welcome back to the Producer's Room. And I just learned we are with a multi-Grammy winning engineer, producer, mixer, Bob Bullock. So let's talk about that. You said you had a couple Grammys for Shania stuff? Grammy for Shania?
Yeah.
As an overdub for the
overdub engineering stuff. I mixed a record for...
A live record, and then you were saying you also mixed... Or got a couple for...
Yeah, I mixed a record for Ray Benson,
Okay.
Sleep at the Wheel.
Yeah.
That was a tribute to Bob Wills, and that got us a couple of Grammys.
Nice.
And, I'm trying to think. There's been a couple of others, but
yeah, it's just, you just lose count.
Well, yeah, you kind of do actually, because it's been
but you know what?
wow.
What's interesting is I was talking to another engineer that worked, and I don't know when the date was, but was it true that they didn't award Grammys at a certain point for engineering? Like you would just get a certificate or something?
Yeah. They limited the actual Grammy for a long time to just a certificate they would send you.
Lame, man.
Well, it was, but they've changed. They resolved that. But it was just, I think, only artist and producer that could get an actual the Grammy. So engineering, they were kind enough to send you a plaque thing, but it wasn't the same thing.
Well, speaking of artists and winning Grammys and all that, I just looked down this list and we just talked about Shania, but you've worked on a lot of albums with Reba, you worked on a lot of albums with George Strait. Maybe just talk about, and then just like I said, a huge list that if you guys are curious about, you can go to AllMusic or Wikipedia or wherever you are and read all of Bob's credits. But tell me just a couple stories about working with some of these artists that are prolific in their output, and also just maybe what makes a successful artist. I know that's a whole nother kind of tangent, but any commonalities that you saw with working all these great artists, however you want to treat that question.
Okay. I've been fortunate, and it's certainly been my desire to be artist oriented, you might say, and work with artists that they all bring what they do to the table,
Right.
And most everybody that I've worked with, has been, whether it's Waylon Jennings or Glenn Campbell or Reba McEntire or George Strait, they've certainly brought their own style. And so as producers and engineers, our mission is to capture that. That's really what we're doing.
Right.
So I work with people, even as a producer, I work with an artist, not to tell them what songs to do and not to tell them how to sing. I'm supposed to keep them in the guardrails, but really what I'm trying to do is help them perfect their vision. So the artists that write their own material, that does take it to a different place, because that the whole sound is unique. And most artists I've worked with have been had to have a bit of a tunnel vision about not paying attention to what everyone else is doing.
Sure.
You see what I mean? It's not.
No, well, I was just going to even ask you, or any down your whole list. I mean, just any interesting stories you have, just like jumping in the studio, one take kind of thing. I mean, as far as just nailing a vocal or nailing a performance, or.
I mean, I've had those experiences too. Going back in time as an assistant engineer, working with Aretha Franklin, she was like that. Had the good fortune to work with Johnny Mathis. They just came in and sang the song, and everybody went, "Oh wow!" And they were done.
15 or 20 punches in there. And all that.
Usually they were just done. Reba McEntire was very much like that. If Reba would listen to her vocal and say, I can redo that second verse better, and she'd go ahead and redo it. Wow. By the time I came to Nashville, we were definitely doing even more of comping. As we started getting more technology to allow us to do things, we'd at least lay down several performances, even if we ended up picking one, but we'd probably have the artist, sing it several times so we could move pieces. It's probably hard to even think now, but prior to probably 1996, there really was no tuning or pocketing.
Or you could maybe fake it with the Eventide or something like that. I've heard, but
that was even in the mid 90s when that started.
That's true.
So prior to that, every recorded piece of music that anyone's ever heard has been what the artist brought to the table.
Wow.
You know?
Wow.
So.
All right, I want to jump into technology, and we'll probably hear some more artist anecdotes as we're talking with some of this, but I really want to get into some of the technical stuff because you have so much good information there. So let's talk about maybe Desert Island, either mic setups or signal change. So maybe a typical Nashville setup. So acoustic guitar, piano, drums if we have time, if you want to go there, bass cab / DI, and what did I miss? Electric guitar. Starting mic combinations on each of those, if you want to throw them out. I mean, do you, like, for instance, let's start with electric guitar. 57, 121, or...
You know,
are you doing much tracking nowadays? I don't want to...
Well, I still do a bit, and the tracking part of it has not, as I said, changed much for me. But I can tell you that I grew up in the industry and still maintain that in such a way that I don't get real caught up in the gear,
right?
And the
well, that's
microphones,
good.
Because for one thing, you know, I prior to having my own mixing room, I've been an independent engineer for almost 40 years, you know, and so I've worked in lots of different rooms.
Yeah.
So if in this room, it's got an API, I'm going to make it work with an API desk.
Exactly.
If tomorrow I'm cutting tracks on another artist, and it's a SSL desk, I'll make it work with that, and so forth and so on. And they have different gear.
Right.
So, like microphones, I have go-tos, and for me, it has a lot to do with the amount of time I have. Okay.
So let's take it from this perspective. Are you going from like a Massenburg school of thought where you're just saying, I want everything flat going in and then I'll color it later? Or are you trying to purposely say, well, I'll use this SM57 because it's going to do less EQ work on the back end?
My goal is to carve everything just the way I want it, where mixing is nothing but a
pull up faders, maybe some panning.
That's my intention.
Okay, so if you had unlimited time,
Yeah.
you know, mic selection, then you could kind of dial that in more. Okay.
I mean, a good example would be even like working with, you know, like a producer like Mutt Lang, or any of these people that we've talked about, with such, because arrangement is such a big part of it. You could literally pull up all the faders flat at the end of the production, and it would sound fantastic. Now, you can still find ways to spend a couple of days messing with it, but I'm saying it would already sound fantastic. So that's always been my goal as well. Now, as far as go-to mics, you know, when I first set up a tracking date, like a Nashville tracking date, it's generally everything I do is generally kind of in the earthy, organic category, which is why I love working in Nashville so much, because I get to work more with live bands and live. So my go-to for guitars would be certainly, you know, I can't mess up on a electric guitar with an SM57. Over the years, and I'm sure it seems like lots of others do it too, after experimenting with some things like back of cabinet space and distance, I found that a Royer 121 and 57 has been the great combination for me.
And that allows you to, for folks that are wondering why, right? That allows you to add more mids if you want the dynamic, or more top.
Well,
more body, or
see what a ribbon mic does on there, and you know, it used to be like, you know, like it's kind of like the Abbey Road studios. You know, we weren't allowed to use ribbon mics in certain things because you'd blow them up. You know, the tech staff wasn't too thrilled with that. You know, you put a RCA 66 on a 666 on a you know, bass drum or something. So the Royers, and I suppose there's others now, but they can take so much sound pressure level that what they get you is by having that figure eight natural pattern front and back, where a 57 is very direct, very mid-range, everything. You get to capture front and back. So now, one of the techniques that I used for years is I'd put a microphone in front of an electric guitar cabinet, and then I would put a microphone in an open back in the back, you know, to get a little bit more air around it. But yeah, those are very good go-to things. But I've used, you know, lots of other mics. I've used 414s, I've used U87s. You know, microphones are just a tone control. You know, so.
Natural EQ, So, I mean, any other instrument? I mean, we don't have to go down the list, but anything that pops out to you, like let's say a vocal. Now, if let's take, like you said, Shania's record was top-selling female record of all time. If you get a vocalist like that, and let's say you have to try out 5 different mics, are there any go-tos that like a 251 or a 47 that you would pull up? Or?
Yeah, generally, you're going to find something in one of those microphones that's going to, bring out what the singer's voice has for nuances because they pick up so much detail.
Yeah.
And that's the big difference. Now, I've worked with artists that, after trying 3 or 4 different microphones, especially if it's more of a rock type thing or bluesy or something, an SM7 has been the best choice.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's a great mic.
And so, or even a Sennheiser 421, But generally for the crooners, for the, country music artists and everything, if you start with some large diaphragm tube microphones, you're going to pick up more of the nuances. A U67 might be a better choice for a female, a 251, maybe for a male singer with a deeper tone, maybe a tube 47.
Right.
But all the mics vary just like an old car.
Exactly.
So if you a 57 Chevy is a 57 Chevy, but another one's going to be in different shape than
that's the variable,
first one. And so there is a variable, and I don't think there's any one magic microphone for a singer, but I like to include the singer in picking microphones and preamps and all that, and making a vocal chain, because again, it always comes back to making everybody feel good. Exactly. So if the artist listens to 3 or 4 microphones and they say, I like the way my voice sounds on that one, psychologically they're going to even give you a better vocal.
Wow.
And so the gear is not really that important, to be honest.
Yeah.
But having everybody feel good about it and going the extra mile, and if you feel like later you would like to EQ or compress a guitar tone, I do it going to tape or Pro Tools, because that way they're hearing it back that way. Headphone mixes are crucial to me. I'm always trying to make everybody in the room hear themselves like it's a finished record, and it inspires them. So.
And I would think someone like yourself that studied under all these greats would probably also pay attention to some phase relationships here and there, right? I mean, is there any tried and true method you use to check phase other than listening in mono, or do you use any type of scope, or do you get that technical even, or do you just hear it kind of as something?
Well, generally you can. Yeah, generally you can hear it. So in my early days of tracking and working under other engineers, and I don't mind saying, everybody that I got to work under, and it was certainly a blessing.
Yeah.
It wasn't that anyone really stopped and just explained to me why they were doing something. You just kind of watch what they're doing and get a feel for certain things that they tend to like, and the other person does it completely different. And so that's where I always go back to. It's really about creating the vibe and everything. But like as far as the mono stuff, we used to mix primarily in mono, and even when I first started learning how to get drum sounds, I learned that if I had everything mono, I would immediately be able to tell like if one of the floor tom mics was out of phase or something. And so I would get my sounds like with the stereo piano mics or multiple drum mics all in mono.
Yeah.
Once I made a determination if it was as phase correct as I could make it, then I'd put everything in stereo.
Yeah. And if it was bad, you would just go move a mic. You wouldn't
either move a mic, or if it was 180 degrees out of phase, I could flip the phase or swap the mic if I had to. I worked in consoles that didn't have they didn't all have
the polarity.
Yeah, polarity available. And another thing too is I worked in consoles that had phantom power rails on the entire console, and so even if you had ribbon mics, you still had to plug them into a phantom power. So it wasn't until later on that like SSL sort of how you could shut phantom power off. So you just had to learn how to be careful with it, but you could do that. And so with thinking about that, now of course looking at waveforms and everything, you can after the fact, if somebody wasn't so careful with that, you can adjust things. There's a fantastic plug-in called Auto Align.
Yeah,
are you familiar with Auto Align?
It's a good one, and then the same company makes that Pi one too. I haven't quite figured out the difference. I think one's tonality and phase. And
I do like Auto Align.
That's crazy with drums. Yeah,
but that is a big factor. So what that was one thing I learned, that if you're careful about alignment, and phase relationship, then everything is more detailed.
Yeah.
It's like takes that blurriness and frames it up
Yeah,
like a
yeah.
4K,
Yep.
TV. Also for many years we used phase checkers. So way before the musicians came in and we had to, bother them with all that stuff, we'd phase check the lines.
And when you're doing that, you're making sure the speaker goes out when you have the actual phase checker.
Yeah, yeah. We've always had this phase 2, phase 3 wiring scheme.
Yes.
And so if Americans adopted, the phase 3,
Yes.
or pin 3 hot, okay?
Yeah.
And so in European,
Right.
standard was pin 2 hot.
Yes.
So when you brought in like a stock German microphone,
Yes.
and you were recording it, putting it next to a
Right.
American SM57, one would be out of phase. So a lot of studios I worked in, and that was even a thought someone had to determine when they commissioned a console in the studio, whether it was going to be wired pin 2 or pin 3
Right.
hot. And so a lot of the studios that I worked at, the pro places, they would make sure all their microphones were either pin 2 or pin 3, so it was consistent. And I even on my outboard gear, when I used to carry a lot of outboard gear, had that ability to switch phase, But it's very important. It's a big part of getting that clarity and dimension. If you have, say, if everything is in the same phase and say it's all pin 3 and it's going through your amplifier and to your speakers, then you're going to have more clarity even on the, how the bass responds and everything. The diaphragm's going out and not in.
Yeah.
So
and Steely Dan and Roger Nichols would be proud because we're audiophiles, right? We're really listening to every tone.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and then I want to come back to mixing because I know you have a lot to say there as well.
Okay.
So be right back with Bob Bullock.